otras empresas aquí
Okay,
en Ciudad Juárez.
so without further ado, we want to cordially welcome you to this webinar where our experts will discuss challenges and opportunities for Mexico from the perspectives of the USMCA and a post-COVID world. So first of all, let me begin by introducing today's panelists. Daniel Linsker. Daniel is a partner at Control Risks and currently manages Control Risks Mexico office, overseeing the delivery of solutions and services to clients in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Before moving to Mexico, Daniel led the security and crisis consulting practice for Control Risks in Latin America and also headed the Americas region extractives consulting practice. Daniel specializes in developing, leading, and implementing tailored and integral solutions for clients to manage complex issues across the Americas, with a special emphasis on risk management for large projects in extractives, energy, and infrastructure, and those that require in-depth regional expertise of Latin America. Kenneth Smith is a partner at AGON. Ken specializes in international trade and advice on all aspects related to the implementation of Mexico's diverse array of free trade agreements, FTAs. Ken was Mexico's chief negotiator for USMCA until its signing and has been an integral part of Mexico's trade negotiation teams for every major FTA since the original NAFTA. As Mexico's chief USMCA negotiator, Ken was responsible for the design of the strategy for all aspects of the negotiation, including the automotive rules of origin provisions. He also negotiated the side letters that protect Mexico against any national security measures that the United States might impose against the automotive sector under Section 232. Samuel Campos is an executive managing director at Newmark. Samuel has been a key part of Newmark's growth since his incorporation. He is currently in charge of the company's consulting practice, focusing in aspects such as industrial site selection. Samuel has a wide experience on industrial development matters. His career started more than 20 years ago, both in private and the public sector. Samuel has been involved on the administration and commercialization process of industrial parks, as well as economic development advisory to different state governments. So these are today's panelists, and a little bit of housekeeping. We will begin with a tandem presentation by our experts, followed then by a discussion, and afterwards a Q&A session. If you have any questions along the presentation, please use the chat function to send them to me, and they will be addressed by the end of our webinar. Today's presentation will also be available, so please, if you need to update your email address, drop me a line. Without further ado, I leave you to our experts. Daniel, if you will, please.
Thank you, Carlos, and good morning to everyone. It's great to join such an esteemed panel to discuss some of the challenges and opportunities that we see in Mexico. And unfortunately, because I am the risk expert, so I get to start with all the negatives or all the pessimistic side of what we're seeing in Mexico. And maybe if you could put the presentation forward one more. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about some of the negative things that we're seeing in Mexico, and I'll start with the two probably biggest concerns or biggest issues that we've seen around the country as expressed by our joint clients. And those two issues amount to what is happening with the economy and the confidence that investors, both internationally and locally, have of what is going on in terms of sort of like the fourth transformation and what is happening with security. And I don't want to dig too deep into the specific outcome of this, but two things that are really worth emphasizing. First of all, security has been getting worse over the last couple of years, and needless to say, if you manage to see the graph on the top, that's the level of the rate of homicides in Mexico per year. So you see it's been a trend since 2006 where the amount of homicides has increased. And if you see the image on the right hand corner, almost all of the security indicators in Mexico, it's homicide, robbery, business robbery, extortion, kidnapping, have increased from 2015 to 2019. We tend to exclude from this analysis 2020 because obviously it's been a bit of a strange year. So security seems to be getting worse. It's not necessarily gotten significantly worse under the current administration, but it is a trend that started back in 2006 and has continued. and there's some specific challenges. I'll talk about those in a second in terms of security and the perception of security. The second issue worth noting is what's been happening with the economy. And I think there's really two interesting things to bear in mind there. So obviously there's been a lot of talk and there's been a lot of things said of what is happening in terms of let's call it the country risk profile under the new administration and how it has treated or mistreated investors depending on where you sit. Obviously, one of the first decisions that the new administration took, which was the cancellation of the new Mexico City airport, sent shockwaves throughout markets in terms of potential respect for contracts and what it meant for private investors. And what you started to see was, as a result of some of that loss of investor confidence, was that Mexico and the Mexican economy started to slow down even before the pandemic. Obviously, with the pandemic, it is hard to think back to 2019. But if you look at the numbers for 2019, Mexico was technically already in recession. The economy contracted, and it was up until the first quarter of this year before the pandemic, it was also contracting. And there's a second element to bear in mind, which actually allows us to highlight the fact that this is to some extent a homegrown problem, if you want to call it that, is that for the first time in roughly 60 years, the Mexican economy seems to have decoupled from the US economy. And that might have an interesting set of repercussions for when we talk about the opportunities and what might the new USMCA bring to the table. But what we mean by decoupling is basically if you track GDP growth between the US and Mexico, they have tended to correlate with a small lag for the last 60 years. So when the US grows, Mexico grows. When the US economy slows down, the Mexican economy tends to slow down. And if you look at the small graph below, you would have seen from basically the middle of so like towards the end of 2019 and all throughout 2019, the US economy and the Mexican economy decoupled. So that is an interesting thing to bear in mind. So what is actually happening in Mexico under the fourth transformation? This is sort of like the highlights and what people see. Can you move to the next slide, please? There's a couple of things, and it's always interesting to point out from the onset that what the new president, well, not so new anymore, but what the fourth transformation is looking to do is not necessarily as part of a very comprehensive political or economic program. I think what we've realized very quickly and very straightforward is in the view of the administration, the state should be at the center of key economic activity. And what we mean by that is basically probably a lot of the heavy industries, a lot of the heavy investments, whether it's energy, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's infrastructure, there is a sense that the state should be at the center of this. And obviously this is no surprise to anyone who follows Mexico. The new administration has actually very, very radically mentioned that this is what they want to do. They want to favor the CFE, they want to favor Pemex, they want to actually bring in regulator that allows the state to be at the center of this activity, whether it's on infrastructure through national key infrastructure development plans. This is their view. This is both negative and positive. Negative because Mexico had actually done a lot of, had developed quite interestingly along international best practice when it came to investment in infrastructure, the allocation of oil fields. They were basically at an international best practice standard, and all of a sudden they've taken steps back on this. So again, still opportunities there. We're going to discuss about that, but those are some of the challenges from this. Another thing that we've seen, and this is something that has particularly had a negative impact on international investors in particular, is what they see as erratic policymaking. I think one of the things that characterized Mexico up until 2 years ago was that there was a certain degree of policy predictability, right? You could kind of figure out if something made sense, experts backed it. This is something that you could actually figure out what was going to take place and what type of policy making was going to happen. This is something that has been lost to some extent. There's a lot of reasons why that is the case. Everything from changes and people exiting some of the state bureaucracy, all the way to ideology clashing to some extent with expertise. And again, this is actually not a Mexican phenomenon on its own. I mean, we see this around the world where political needs are trumping, pardon the pun, expertise. There's a third element there, which is the regulatory capacity. I think, again, there's no secret in saying that independent regulators feel or are realistically under attack, whether it's by cuts in their budget or whether it's by directly changing the people that get appointed to these regulatory bodies. There is a growing sense, effectively, that regulatory capacity has been eroded. Again, this is having some negative effects on investor confidence, because suddenly there's a sense that you cannot trust the regulators, while 2 or 3 years ago, and you could trust regulators would follow what was written on the law, and you could actually had a very high level of confidence in their ability to independently judge issues. That seems to have been eroded over the last couple of years. A fourth element of this has been the weaponization of anti-corruption efforts. And I think there's a couple of elements there. Again, to some extent, the new president was elected on the back of a commitment to fight corruption. And I don't want to get into all the details of what is going on in terms of corruption in Mexico. But one of the things that we have seen in terms of sort of like investments and investors around Mexico is that there is a sense that anti-corruption is now, probably as it was in the past, selectively applied. There is one concern along those lines, which is to some extent the anti-corruption effort has been deinstitutionalized. So while before you had the Fiscalia and you had the growing or the nascent national anti-corruption system, which to some extent was stillborn, now it seems that anti-corruption efforts are slightly more selective, and is something that has caused a lot of concerns, especially because a lot of the investigations seem to be being led by the Financial Intelligence Unit, which is part of the executive rather than the judiciary. Another factor in all of this is the government security strategy, to some extent, seems to have abandoned certain parts of Mexico. And what we mean by that, I mean, I think everyone who's been following Mexico will have seen the government's approach as summarized by abrazos, no balazos, which translates roughly as hugs, not bullets. And basically, they've put all of their efforts into the creation of the National Guard. I think this will be a topic for a complete different webinar as to whether that's accurate or inaccurate and whether it will be effective or not. But unfortunately, what it has created to some extent is that a lot of the budget that was going into state and municipal police forces is now being channeled in terms of security towards the National Guard, which doesn't have the size or the capability to provide security across the whole of Mexico. And so if you look at what ends up happening in practicalities, you'll deploy the National Guard to one part, there'll be an improvement in security in that part, and then something, the security situation will deteriorate in another part, and they will redeploy the National Guard to that part, and where they were, now you'll start to feel security deterioration again. And if you look at the positioning of the bases, if you look at the budgeting purpose, so like the budget allocated to the National Guard, you realize that there are some areas of Mexico that to some extent have been abandoned in terms of security. And finally, what is effectively going on, this is like the cornerstone of the political project that Morena and President López Obrador have in mind, is a bet on rescuing Pemex, rescuing the CFE, and actually going all in terms of guaranteeing that in next year's midterms, they have a majority which allows them 3 more years of effective unchecked rule, if you want to call it that. Again, this is something that it has caused a little bit of concern among investors in terms of how they see Mexico. And obviously it depends on whether it'll pay off or not. I mean, again, we can, in the Q&A, we can talk about Pemex's financial situation and whether it's salvable or not. But effectively, this is what the government has been concentrating its efforts on. So when people sometimes ask, why are you not paying attention to different things like manufacturing or agriculture or sending resources that way, a lot of the logic that goes behind a lot of the efforts of the government is political, and it's based on precisely rescuing Pemex, the CFE, and ensuring that in next year's elections, they secure a majority in the midterms. So that's the general picture of Mexico. Do you want to go to the next slide? But obviously, as I said, I got the uneasy task of sharing all the bad news. And before I pass over to Samuel and Ken, I think the thing to bear in mind is that there is no need to panic yet. I think apart from all of these negative noises that are coming out, whether it's because of politics, whether it's because of security, whether it's because of the political situation, for the most part, the country has not drastically changed. There's actually, it is generally an attractive place to do business. There's a lot of opportunities out there. There's a lot of new opportunities, which we're going to discuss now in terms of the framework of the USMCA. And so I think if you take some of this with a certain degree of a pinch of salt, you realize that there is no need to panic yet. Obviously, it's hard to say that to someone who's already been potentially affected, whether especially if you're in the renewable sector or in the oil and gas sector. But if you think, and talking to a lot of our clients in manufacturing, in pharma, in agriculture, you realize that they are not as negative as sometimes some of these noises might sound. And with that, I'll pass the word to Ken and Samuel to go on to the opportunities, the nicer side of the talk.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's a real pleasure. First of all, allow me to thank Control Risks and Newmark for the opportunity to be with all of you today to talk a little bit about where we are economically in the region and the impacts of the USMCA in Mexico, the opportunities and risks that we see going forward. So if we go to the next slide, please. It's very important to understand that, of course, the USMCA came into effect on July 1st of this year, as you know, and it is an agreement that replaces the original NAFTA, which had created a relationship in trade and investment in North America that surpasses $1 trillion. Only between Mexico and the US, we have $600 billion in trade, thanks to the NAFTA over 25 years. And this was a very different negotiation. I'm referring to the USMCA negotiation vis-a-vis the NAFTA, because whereas Mexico and Canada share the view that we could upgrade the NAFTA and bring it up to the needs of the 21st century economy, we saw it as an agreement that had worked well and that could be improved. Whereas the US came to the table because of the premises of Make America Great Again and the economic nationalism that in fact led to Trump to win the presidency. Their position was that there was a big economic injury to the United States due to NAFTA, and that this had to be fixed. And there was a real obsession with the trade deficit with Mexico, with not allowing the dispute settlement mechanisms of impartial, so-called extraterritorial panels to make decisions. So it was tough from the get-go. And this, what you see on screen, are Mexico's top priorities in the modernization of the NAFTA, which we believe were accomplished. So the first pillar was regional competitiveness. So not going back to manage trade, creating new technical barriers to trade. So not backtracking on the level of opening that we had in North America. Taking advantage of the opportunities of the current economy, which means essentially upgrading the agreement with disciplines that reflect the reforms, the progress in our region over the last 25 years, and of course, the emergence of disciplines such as digital trade and information technologies revolution, many of the elements that today are essential, but didn't even exist back when the agreement was negotiated. We also, as a third pillar, pushed actively to have a more responsible and inclusive trade policy to be reflected in the USMCA. And that involved introducing certain policies that are more on the social side, which have a direct linkage to trade, investment, and the economic well-being of the region. So measures to combat corruption, strengthening the disciplines on labor and the environment, gender provisions to activate and promote 51% of our economically active population, and of course, how to help SMEs take advantage of the trade agreements. And also in the fourth pillar was essential because it had to do with creating the necessary legal certainty for trade and investment in the region. So establishing a transparent and environment of free and constant, clear competition throughout all sectors in the region, and also preserving and strengthening the dispute resolution mechanisms. So if we go to the next one, we can begin to see, based on these premises, what were the actual results of the USMCA? And I divided in three major areas. The first one is the fact that we were able to modernize the agreement. 12 new chapters were introduced with disciplines that were not included in the original NAFTA. Some of them are on screen right now. I've spoken a bit about them in terms of digital trade, anti-corruption, SMEs, but this is not a comprehensive list. Like I said, we have other areas such as good regulatory practices, areas where we looked to upgrade the agreement to put it in line with what the most advanced trade agreements were at the time in the world. We took a lot of examples out of the agreement we negotiated in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but we North Americanized them, so to speak. So big advances on imposing rules on digital trade, guaranteeing competition in the telecommunication sector, etc. So that was something that brings up to date, upgrades our agreement. The next one, please. It's very important to realize that we were able to agree on the most difficult subjects. So while we were advancing throughout the negotiation that lasted approximately a year and a half, we advanced on all of the sort of the new subjects, the modernization issues and chapters. We were also in a position to deal with very tough proposals that were put on the table. And these are three of the main elements. We were able to do away with the proposal by the US to have a sunset clause, a sudden death clause after 5 years of the agreement, and change that around to have every 6 years, there will be a comprehensive review of how the agreement is put into place as being implemented. And that opens the possibility for society, for the private sector, academia, and NGOs to provide inputs as to how the agreement can be constantly improved, which is a mechanism we did not have in the NAFTA. And in our opinion, it led to a lot of the problems, sort of creating a pressure cooker, which Trump arrived just in time to blow up with his electoral campaign, saying that NAFTA had been a disaster, which was not true, but that was the political premise the US had. So we did away with the sunset clause and have a review clause that will be very beneficial for the agreement. One of the big focus of the negotiation was, of course, the auto rules of origin, where the US wanted to tighten the rules in order to force investment to remain and to come to the United States. We worked for many, many months on convincing the US, along with the US automotive sector, the Canadian automotive sector, and the Mexican sector, that you could not force investment to remain anywhere, since we are not a Soviet-like economy in North America. So we managed to have a balanced negotiation on auto rules, where we do increase the rules of origin, the content requirement for North America. We preserve free trade, but these robust rules promote regional integration. So more North American content in automotive production. And we have a sort of insurance policy which protects us against any moves that the US may make in terms of imposing national security measures in the automotive sector. Mexico and Canada will be excluded. And of course, one of the pillars that I already mentioned is dispute resolution. We were able to maintain the different elements of dispute resolution that existed in the NAFTA and upgrade them to ensure that in cases where any one of the USMCA parties violates any of the commitments of the agreement, we can have expeditious procedures to return to free trade in the specific area. So that was very important. The next one. It's very important to realize that in a trade agreement, it's just as important what is established in the agreement as the things that were taken off the table. In other words, what is not included in the agreement. And many of the proposals that originally the US put on the table to try to have managed trade, to reduce the exports from Mexico in the key strategic sectors, precisely with this view towards reducing in an artificial manner the trade deficit that the US had with Mexico, we were able to do away with proposals to establish restrictions in the agricultural sector, in textiles. And one thing that you will not find in the agreement is a chapter on trade deficit reduction, because the original proposal was that depending on the level of the trade balance between any of the USMCA countries, you could decide to impose protectionist measure. In other words, you could erect trade barriers if the deficit increased, and we rejected that, which was very important for the USMCA, but also for the multilateral trading system, because you can bet your farm that the US would have taken this issue on the trade deficit, the possibility of imposing trade barriers when a trade deficit grows, and take that as a proposal to the WTO. So luckily we were able to do away with that. So if we move on to the next one, you know, the USMCA has almost 2,000 pages, and it's very complicated for companies or associations to fully understand if they just sit down and start reading the text. Where are the opportunities? What are the things they need to know? So at AGON, we have developed, along with our team of former trade negotiators, a USMCA compliance guide, where we try to summarize in a way all of the key elements that any company or trade association needs to know in order to navigate the waters of the USMCA. And here are some of the key examples. Basically, it's very important to understand, as I mentioned at the beginning, that the provisions on strengthening labor rights protections are upgraded in the USMCA. There are no longer side agreements, as it was the case with labor and with environmental provisions. They are a central part of the agreement, and most importantly, they're subject to dispute settlement, which means that they have enforceable disciplines, a rapid mechanism for the establishment of panels in case there's a violation, and this can go specifically to the company, to the plant level, to identify if there isn't any weakening or non-compliance with the commitments in the labor chapter, including the new elements on union democracy. There can be the imposition of barriers on specific companies. So this wasn't the case before. The system didn't have really teeth, and now they do. So it's important for companies to understand where they are standing in terms of their relationship with their unions, if they have a union relationship within their plants, and how they are complying with all of the other elements of prohibiting child labor, forced labor, discrimination, violence at the workplace. And we recommend, and we are helping companies in conducting internal audits to understand where they stand and how they can comply. And another block here of the key elements that anybody who wants to develop in North America has to understand is the rules of origin, customs procedures, and trade facilitation. You have to understand the rules of origin in your sector. They are different for every sector, in fact, for every product. Many of them in the USMCA, I would say the majority, remain in the same way they were in the NAFTA, or were even made more flexible, as in the case of TV manufacturing and many others, but some become stricter in the areas of textiles, in the areas of automotive. So you need to know where you stand and what the rules are and how they are implemented. That's why the uniform regulations that were published after the USMCA was signed are very important, because they give you the detail as to how each one of these rules of origin needs to be implemented. And on customs procedures and trade facilitation, it's very important to understand the changes that took place, the reduction in the bureaucracy and costs of crossing the border in terms of simplified procedures that take advantage of information technologies, less paperwork, and you can really help the bottom line of your company if you understand what these new rules are. I mentioned a little bit of digital trade. This is something that is here to stay in the world economy, both in business to consumer relationship and business to business transactions. The USMCA establishes clear rules as to how to facilitate digital trade, and it is something that every company should understand. And also, when we talk about the energy sector, it's very important, and there's a discussion in Mexico, you know, whether Mexico is complying or not with the USMCA commitments on energy. We have to understand that energy is included in the USMCA, as it is in the Trans-Pacific Partnership and our new agreement with the European Union. The energy reform that Mexico conducted in 2014 is included, it is protected, and Mexico cannot backtrack on it. That's one of the commitments. We can continue opening the sector, but we cannot close it. And if Mexico does take measures against companies that are investing in the energy sector, the dispute settlement mechanisms are there to protect their investments. So if we go to the next one, with this compliance guide that I mentioned, we see a lot of the opportunities, the areas that companies should be aware of when they're considering Mexico for investing, so to take advantage of the North American market. But we also have to stop for a minute and talk about how the USMCA is coming into effect at a time when we have the worst economic crisis probably that the North American region has ever seen, caused in large part because of the COVID crisis. So we're operating in a difficult environment, which is affecting, on the one hand, the way supply chains are operating throughout the world, and Sam will talk about that in a minute. But one of the big lessons that we're seeing, of course, in a crisis caused by COVID, and whenever there's economic crisis worldwide, there's a tendency to become more protectionist, to start looking inward and closing off your borders. And this is a big mistake. It's what happened in the 1929 World Depression with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and it happens time and time again. So we're seeing this even in developed countries and even in our partners to the north. Here on screen, you see some of the statements by some of the key advisors to President Trump on international trade, where they claim, Peter Navarro claims, that the lesson from COVID is that the US cannot rely on global supply chains, and it has to try to be absolutely self-sufficient, which of course is an economic impossibility. But even the author of the USMCA, one of the authors, Robert Lighthizer, the US trade representative, is talking about the era of offshoring US jobs as being over, that it's not positive for US companies to go other places and invest. And this is false, because one of the key elements that we've been pushing here in Mexico is that the Mexican government from day one should be working with the Biden administration on convincing them, the Biden transition team, on convincing them that investing in Mexico is not offshoring for the US. It's actually nearshoring, because Mexico belongs to the same production perimeter in North America where Canada, Mexico, and the US stand. And when we produce goods together, we are able to lower costs, increase quality, and compete with the rest of the world in a successful manner. So that's one of the objectives of foreign policy in Mexico as the new administration in the US arrives. It should be convincing the US that it is positive to invest in Mexico. When companies invest in Mexico from the US and export, 40% of those exports are US value. But when they go to China and China exports to the rest of the world, it's only about 2% US value. So you see the big difference in calling Mexico offshoring. So this is important. The next one, before I hand it over to Sam, I think it's very important when we analyze the environment where the USMCA is coming into play. Of course, there's a COVID, the changing in the structure of the world economy, but we also had presidential elections in the United States. And it is a fact now, despite what the Trump legal team may say, that on January 20th, President Biden will take over the presidency, and we have to analyze what that means for Mexico. Now, the first thing that I can say is that while Biden won the election and received the most votes a presidential candidate has ever received, I think it's up to 79 million now, the second place of all time is Trump. He got 73 million. So what does this mean in the general scheme of things? I believe it means that the US electorate rejected the personal leadership of Trump as president, his image as president and commander-in-chief of the US, but they did not reject many of the policies and especially the economic nationalism that had led Trump to win the presidency in the first place in 2016. If you see the results of the election, the Republicans didn't lose the Senate and they gained ground in the House of Representatives, even though it's still a Democratic majority. So Biden's going to have to deal with that. He has said that he has to be the president of everybody who did not vote for him, as well as for those who voted for him. So what this means in a nutshell is that economic nationalism will continue in the United States. It'll have a different name, a different form, probably not as hostile. The Make America Great Again hats may be replaced with a Buy American blue hats. And so what it means for Mexico is that on the one hand, there will be protectionist pressure from the Congress and from producers in certain areas, especially in agricultural trade. Pressures are coming from Florida. There's investigations at the ITC against some of the key products, such as blueberries for export from Mexico to the United States. So we have to watch for that, the increasing pressures to become protectionist in the agricultural sector. And Mexico is not helping its own cause because our environmental ministry is also establishing a series of obstacles in Mexico for the import of US agricultural biotechnology, herbicides such as glyphosate and other products. So we could have a potential dispute on agriculture soon under the USMCA. There's also, of course, the potential of labor disputes occurring under the USMCA. The Democrats will be more incisive on labor and environmental issues when it comes to compliance of the USMCA, so we should watch for that, as I mentioned. And what I already mentioned, of course, the energy sector, which there will be a big priority and emphasis placed by the Biden administration on pursuing an energy policy based on clean energy, on renewable fuels. So this is something that's very important for the Biden administration, and where we have had severe mixed signals in Mexico regarding how welcoming we are to renewable energy, to clean energy in Mexico. And so that's an area where there could be also pressure from the Biden administration. Overall, however, it's important to understand that as opposed to what Trump did at the beginning of his administration, the Biden administration is not going to look to renegotiate the USMCA. They're not going to put it into question, but they're going to emphasize all of the enforcement elements that I discussed here. So now with that, I'll turn it over to Sam.
Thank you very much, Ken. It was a great explanation. Thanks, Daniel, too, for your thorough explanation. It's a great pleasure to be with both of you here. And well, we have seen about the risk. We have seen about the USMCA. So what is happening now? What is happening in the rest of the world? What is happening specifically in Mexico? So if we can go to the next one, Carlos. In March, April of this year, we were talking about the perfect storm, okay? We were talking about this trade war. We were talking about the COVID without knowing exactly what's going on there. And we were talking about the upcoming implementation of the USMCA. During all this time, we have seen that some things have changed. We are still facing a perfect storm, but now, and as Ken was saying, we are not talking about a trade war as one of the ingredients of this perfect storm. Now we are talking about the economic nationalism, okay? About COVID, we know more about it. We know that the vaccine is coming. We know that maybe around mid-2021, it won't be a pandemic. It will be something more focalized on each country, but we will be basically out of the pandemic scenario. And finally, we are now living under USMCA regulations. So what are the lessons of this? One of the most important lessons is that being well located may imply the difference between survive or not survive. There is a risk associated with your location. And as long as there is a risk associated with the location, also the companies keep looking for a low-cost country production hub. So the challenge now is to mix that production cost, logistic cost, against a nearshoring or reshoring strategy. Okay, so what is happening? What is the rationale behind this? The first thing is companies are looking for import substitution. Okay, the second one still apply, and Ken was talking about that the economic nationalism will remain, and that's part of that that's one of the things that made Trump won 4 years ago. So this nationalism will remain, and it led us to the Section 232. It will remain. The U.S. government has seen that it works, and they will keep using it. So that certainly comes with the nearshoring strategies for companies with European or American capital who have investments in the Asian countries. And they will have to analyze how to come closer to the production center. So this doesn't mean that China will face an exiting of investments or an exiting of companies looking for a different location. What we are seeing is that the new formula will be China plus one. Okay, all the companies will remain operating in China as long as there is a huge market there, and the market won't be strong or shrink or reduced, but they will have to have another location, a nearshore location, where they can avoid all those risks associated to be in China. Okay, so certainly it will lead to a logistics cost reduction. It has to do a lot with the risk aversion that the companies have, or the consolidation strategies. Certainly delivery time or time to market, it's a key factor here. We saw that when China closed the borders because of the COVID, the whole worldwide supply chain was collapsed. And another very important thing is labor cost reduction. Okay, China has become more expensive in some production areas in terms of labor, but now we have to play with another element, which means how we compare automation versus labor. Okay, so that's a new element on the scenario, on the equation that we have to consider, how automation will play a role here. And that's something very, very interesting to analyze. And finally, one of the things that companies are using is they are changing the just-in-time versus for the just-in-case. They have learned that having no security stock or inventory, it's a great risk and it doesn't pay off. Okay, so now the just-in-case is taking a key role on this. Can we move to the next, Carlos, please? So what's been happening since the crisis between China and the US started? Companies start analyzing how to reshape the supply chain. So it will lead to two different things. The first one is companies will look for suppliers in a nearby location, nearshoring or nearshore or reshore location, or they will ask their suppliers to move closer. Okay. Talking about the trade war, just in 2019, exports from China to the US were reduced by $90 billion. Okay, it's a huge amount of money. It meant 17% of the total exports from previous years. Out of those $90 billion, 13 billion went to Mexico. So there is a lot of opportunity. Most of the money, and we're talking about 30 billion, went to different low-cost countries in Asia. So that means that companies are still looking for a low-cost country, but without the risk associated with China. However, and we were talking about this nationalism, as long as being in Asia may be seen as something not good for some American companies, and even if at some point it is seen as something not good for the US government, Asian companies will face a risk, a permanent risk of being treated as a danger company for the supply chain of the US. So being located close to the US production centers or consumption centers is going to be a key factor on this. Can we go to the next one, please? So, and we were talking about companies will look for new suppliers in a nearby region. Certainly, the cost, the production cost, the final cost of the materials will be the most important driver, and this will create regional hubs, regional production hubs, which means that the formula China plus one will remain. Okay, we will have the main or one of the largest factories or facilities in China, but we will see a lot of new factories and facilities in a nearby location. It may be in the US, in Canada, in Mexico, in Costa Rica, in Colombia, or any other country in the I will say in the Latin American region who has trade agreements or trade facilities with the US. Okay, so it's a natural thing to use Mexico as a substitute for sourcing from China. okay? Certainly, we have a lot of advantages, starting with the labor cost, plus the time to market, okay? So can we go to the next one, Carlos? So this is an analysis that we made when we start seeing all this crisis happening. And we use this UNCTAD analysis to check what happened if China reduced 2% its supplies to the world, okay? This is the value of the damage to the different sectors in the world just by a 2% reduction in China's exports, okay? So we're talking about sectors as machinery, as automotive, communications, chemicals, with billions of dollars in potential losses, okay? So that means, again, we cannot place all the eggs in the same basket. Therefore, the formula China plus one has to be implemented, and it's been implemented by so many companies right now. Can we go to the next one? So we were talking about how that reduction of 2% in China's supplies will affect the world. But now how it looks in North American region. And we are talking right here about Mexico and the US just in 3 sectors, okay? Automotive, electrical machinery, and precision instruments. The value of the damage, or the value of this reduction in supply is worth about $3.5 billion. While this is a problem, this is also an opportunity. We have a market of about $3.5 billion that can be produced and shipped to the US from Mexico or from any other of the Latin American countries with the right conditions, okay? So this is a big opportunity that we are seeing here. Can we go to the next one? So we are talking about opportunities, okay? Where are the opportunities? And I will let Ken to take over this next slide to tell us a little bit about where is AGON seeing the opportunities.
Thank you very much, Sam. So if we go to the next slide, what Sam has been talking about is a lot of the opportunities that will arise based on these structural changes in the world economy, the increased concept of nearshoring, and something that companies didn't have to worry about a year ago, which was this notion of a potential complete paralysis of the production capacity because of a pandemic. So all of that is changing and generating opportunities throughout the world, and we definitely see Mexico as a potential beneficiary on the attraction of investment. Now, delving specifically as to the sectors, based on what we're seeing in the world economy, based on the provisions of the USMCA, these 3 groups that we have here on the left of the screen show you what we think are sort of the sectors of the future. And it's no surprise that in the first square, we see those sectors that were already strong within the NAFTA context, that are some of the key sectors in terms of export opportunities, primarily to the US, but also to other countries with whom we have trade agreements, of course, including Canada. So these sectors will continue to be strong. Some of the rules of origin that were made stricter, for example, in the auto sector, will force other regions in the world to realize that it's no longer so easy to just export your components from the automotive sector and introduce them into North American automotive production, because with stricter rules of origin, and not just the regional value content, but the requirements on labor value content, on the origin of the steel and aluminum, and many other rules, you know, in order to take advantage of the North American auto sector, you have to be in North America. And that is also something that is acting to attract investment. In sectors like aerospace, machinery, equipment, electronic, they will benefit tremendously from these rules that are made more expeditious in order to cross the border. In other words, the trade facilitation procedures that will reduce cost of and times in terms of crossing the border will benefit these big sectors. So as we get into these sectors and getting more into the value-added chain in terms of advanced manufacturing, that will continue to benefit them. The second group is what we call sort of the knowledge economy, the technical, scientific, and digital economy. What we saw through the COVID crisis, one of the lessons is that there will be a big increase in the need for medical devices, from simpler components such as personal protection equipment, where Mexico already has a very large capacity, to also to very advanced diagnostics, materials, test kits, etc., surgery equipment, and high-tech medical devices. Also, what we're witnessing throughout the world is a race for the cure, so to speak, for the COVID. So basically, a lot more public and private money is being poured into research, and this will spill over not just to the COVID research, but to other types of diseases and potential viruses, because if we think that COVID is the only threat we have out there, then we're fooling ourselves. So over time, we see a dramatic structure in the way there will be more investment, more research and development done in the pharmaceutical realm. Mexico is perfectly positioned to be a hub for the research and production of these high quality products, including biological pharmaceuticals, etc., precisely helped forward because not only our vicinity to the United States market, but also because of the fact that the intellectual property rules of the USMCA have been strengthened to strengthen patent protection, to strengthen all issues related to innovation and adoption of technology from the IPR, intellectual property standards. So that can definitely boost investment. And of course, digital economy. Mexico is one of the 5 top countries in the world in terms of their growth over the last few years in terms of digital trade. This trend will continue with the insertion also of services that are more complex, like cloud computing services, and basically just the development of software and applications that can help the economy. We're seeing enormous investments in the digital economy in Asia, in Europe, and Mexico should not be the exception. So that's the second big group of sectors that can grow. And the other, which are essential, and they're sort of deemed essential no matter what happens in terms of a crisis, is of course the agricultural and the agribusiness sector. What we saw during COVID is that the countries of North America immediately designated agriculture and food services and products, processed foods as essential, and this is a sector that has actually grown. There's been a shift in the way agricultural production is distributed, basically with a big decline of sales to restaurants and a huge increase to supermarkets, and of course directly to consumers through online purchasing. And that is a very interesting phenomenon, but it'll continue to grow. And those companies are involved in transportation and logistics, and that can introduce technology, cold chain for agriculture, transportation and distribution, just-in-time inventories, but also the investment in new fleets, taking advantage of the opportunity of having cross-border trucking between Mexico and the United States. Companies that are able to provide efficient, cost-reducing services will benefit enormously in the North American environment. I'll turn it right back to Sam now.
Thank you very much, Ken. So where is the opportunity? We see sectors with a huge potential for investment, okay? There are a lot of sectors. I will just tell you that the opportunity is worth more than 300 billion in sales per year, okay? So we're talking about, and I will be focused on this, the motor parts, body parts, steering wheel, transmission, drive axles, because those are considered essential parts under the new regulations of the USMCA. Thankfully, we have the most important expert on USMCA here, but those parts are where companies have to be focused on and finding the ways to increase the production on those parts, or bringing the production of those parts to the North American market, okay? And essentially, most of them are already here in Mexico, and we will be seeing either new investments in these areas coming up, or expansion of the existing facilities for those sectors. The opportunity is huge. The opportunity is amazing. And as a promoters, as a people oriented to attracting investment, this is where I will say the low-hanging fruit could be allocated, okay? So can we go to the next one, Carlos, please? Where is the investment going and moving to? What we've been seeing is that the first wave of companies coming from China to North America is related to the electric electronic industry, okay? They are basically considering the northern part of Mexico, the border, and the city of Guadalajara. And it's very interesting, just as a fact, the city of Tijuana has a vacancy rate of 1.08%, which means they are running out of industrial buildings. Okay, it's also a great opportunity for developers to invest and build either speculative buildings or build-to-suit projects. The other city is Ciudad Juárez. Ciudad Juárez, just for Class A buildings, they have a vacancy rate of 2.5%, which is also almost nothing. And as a reference, a healthy industrial market should be with a vacancy rate of 8%, okay? So 8%, we're talking about a healthy industrial market. When we see numbers like 1.08, 2.5, I mean, that means that the companies are taking whatever is available, okay? So, and also Guadalajara is making it great in the electronic sector, and the vacancy rate for Guadalajara is 4.5. I mean, they are half the way on what a healthy market should be. Then we have the automotive sector, okay? The automotive sector has three main regions where it will be keeping the growth, okay? The first one is the Bajío region, mostly led by Guanajuato and Querétaro. In Querétaro, we have a vacancy rate of 5.8%. In Guanajuato, we have a vacancy rate of 4.1%. And I mean, that's below a healthy market. And that's something that investors should be considering now that we are going out of the COVID crisis, okay? Also, the automotive industry will go to the Northwest sector, cities like Saltillo, Chihuahua, even Juárez or Hermosillo will have a key role on this, as well as the central part of Mexico with cities like Toluca or the state of Mexico in the Tultitlán, Cuautitlán cities or the city of Puebla, okay? So medical devices plus aerospace industry will go to the northwest side of the country. We have seen investments going to Hermosillo, to Tijuana, to Mexicali, and also the leading part in the aerospace industry is going to Querétaro, okay? And finally, the other investment flow that we are seeing that is taking place right now has to do with research and development, shared service centers, and back office. In those cases, cities like Mexico City, Guadalajara, Monterrey, Querétaro, and Mérida will take a key role on this development, okay? We are not including the e-commerce trends because actually we are seeing just two companies right now who are the leaders in the Mexican market, which are Amazon and Mercado Libre. They already have distribution centers in Mexico City, in Monterrey, in the Bajío region, and they have a very strong strategy for growing in the next years. But it's a different animal, I will say so, but it's happening too. However, in the most affected sectors that we are seeing, that's where the investment is heading to. Okay, can we go to the next one, Carlos? So some numbers. We have detected more than 1,200 companies that with presence in Asia then could take advantage of the nearshoring, okay? And this is only for three sectors: automotive, machinery and equipment, and chemical and pharma. We are not talking about the Chinese companies who have gained market in the last years and will have to either lose those market or grow and expand with presence in the North American market. Okay, so we also have detected more than 2,000 companies negatively impacted in North America, especially in those companies depending a lot in the Chinese inputs. Okay, so once again, import substitution becomes a key element on the surviving of the companies, and that's where Mexican manufacturing and Mexican industrial sector has a key role on this part. Another fact, and that's an impressive fact that I learned, is that more than 100 million square feet of industrial land may be required just in case the companies decide to have an increase of 5% on the safety stock. Okay, so we are talking that if companies decide to grow the safety stock just in 5%, that means that 100 million square meters of industrial buildings will be needed, and plus, in addition to the existing inventory of available buildings in the market. That is for North America. Certainly one part of this goes to Mexico, but it's an impressive number. This safety stock strategy that companies should be using now may represent a huge opportunity for the real estate market. Okay, and finally, it's worth to say that all the process have a place in North America. Okay, we are seeing that sophisticated and energy intensive processes can go to US and Canada, and also sophisticated and labor intensive processes have a place in Mexico. Again, the other element of this equation, which is automation, it's something that has enough material for a separate conversation, but it's something that companies are also taking in consideration right now in terms of where to allocate their investments. Okay, so this is what I have for you guys. Now, what is the new? Can we go to the next one, Carlos? I will let Daniel to go on this one and talk about the Mexico's new panorama. You are on mute, Daniel.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you, Samuel. Can you maybe go to the next one? So I think there's an interesting point there, precisely everything that you mentioned in terms of the opportunity and what Ken mentioned around the new USMCA. And I think it comes down to actually Mexico to seize up the opportunity, right? In terms of, so like, how do you proactively manage a reduction in the country's risk profile to some extent? And obviously there's a couple of things in there that we've already mentioned, and I'll mention two, and then I'll let Ken talk about the last two. Obviously, the first one is it's putting in place pro-investment public policies, right? Issues that give, to some extent, not necessarily a massive helping hand, but at least clarity and predictability for investors, right? I think the key issue is not so much whether it's too onerous or too positive or too negative towards investors, but it's mostly about how do you make and create a public policy structure that gives people the investment predictability and their ability to plan ahead and figure out, okay, I'm gonna nearshore to Mexico. I'm gonna invest in a massive industrial plant that I hope is going to be profitable and operational for 30, 40, 50 years. So how do you create that pro-investment set of policies that actually give, as I said, predictability and certainty rather than unpredictability and uncertainty? And obviously the second one is the regulator independence, which is mostly focused around, if I do end up getting into some sort of challenge, problem, concern, how can I make sure that basically, if I do have an issue, I can bring it up to a regulator in an independent fashion who will adjudicate a matter or rule in my favor or against me based on existing laws and best practices. So I think those two are are very focused on what you can, so like what Mexico can create and put in place to reduce the country profile. And I presume Ken has something to say about the implementation of the USMCA and the alignment of public-private sector.
Thank you very much, Daniel. So yeah, I mean, we've been talking about the opportunities that the USMCA can bring to the region and to Mexico. And of course, it sounds obvious, but correctly implementing the commitments of the agreement are essential. They are essential to Mexico in order to aspire to continue having unrestricted access to the most important market in the world, which is the US, and also to Canada, where, by the way, when we look at Canada, it's a relationship that has grown 9 times in terms of trade between Mexico and Canada since the NAFTA came into effect. And what we see now today in terms of trade and investment between Mexico and Canada, it's only the tip of the iceberg. So us in Mexico domestically complying with our commitments, we send the signal that we're committed to the agreement, that we're an open country for trade and investment, and we can definitely benefit from the having this unfettered access to our top trading partners. So in all of this, when we talk about the USMCA, the boost that it will give to the Mexican economy depends a lot on what Daniel was mentioning, in having pro-investment public policies, the right investment in the right direction, and not having mixed signals between different agencies of the cabinet. But the same applies in terms in the long term. For really pursuing economic growth in Mexico, there needs to be a strengthening of public and private sector cooperation. That cooperation began to be lost at the beginning of this year when there was a strong disagreement between the government, the federal government, and the private sector in terms of what should be the right measures to help prop up employment, protect small and medium-sized enterprises during the COVID crisis. There was a lot of calls from the private sector to for the country to go into debt, to dedicate a large percentage of the GDP of the budget to the recovery process based on COVID, just like countries like Brazil or Peru did, approaching 10% of the GDP, while in Mexico, the government decided to give priority to the big infrastructure projects that already the AMLO administration was pursuing, and the percentage of the GDP that's actually dedicated to support employment and help the more than 96% of SMEs that are severely affected by the COVID crisis is very low. So that created a rift that still continues. There have been efforts recently to approach the private sector and the government through a large announcement of a large infrastructure investment program. But experts, when they look at the investment program, they see that a lot of it is investment that was already taking place, and it falls short of the objectives of what we need as a country in terms of the long term to guarantee economic growth in the country. So I think that we can learn the lessons from the spring in terms of the COVID crisis, especially now. One thing we haven't discussed, which is very important, is what happens with this major second wave of COVID that is hitting Europe, that is hitting North America already, and what happens if things get worse. We have to do everything we can to avoid a major lockdown of the economy. That implies coordination between the private sector and the government. The private sector in Mexico has done a great job, at least in the auto sector, aerospace, and other manufacturing areas, in working with the states in establishing protocols to ensure that there won't be a spike in infections and that the plants can continue operating. And so it's very important that this continues, but that there's also a large degree of public and private sector cooperation and a joint definition as to what is the best way that we can help the country recover the road of economic growth. So if we go to the next one, I'll just conclude this part of mine by saying that there's a lot of work Mexico has to do, obviously, as we have said, domestically and in the region. But there's a lot of things we can do throughout the world as well. So USMCA implementation, as we have said, is essential, but also having a firm position vis-a-vis the US, because this economic nationalism is not going to go away. There's going to be a lot of pressure to continue looking inwards and to establish trade barriers. Hopefully, they will begin to fix their relationship with key international organizations such as the WTO, because a return to a positive leadership by the US worldwide helps North America and it helps Mexico. Who knows, maybe Mexico could even work with the United States and Canada to try to get the US back into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's something that could be very positive for the region as well. But from the point of view of Mexico vis-a-vis other regions in the world, we have to actively promote trade and investment and take advantage of our existing trade agreements, such as the CPTPP, finish the modernization of the Mexico-EU FTA, and hopefully have it come into effect in early 2021, as was originally planned. Also take advantage of our mechanism for cooperation and free trade with the Pacific Alliance, where Mexico, Chile, Peru, and Colombia have entered into a historic agreement that liberalizes trade and strengthens economic and social mechanisms of cooperation that are very important as well. And there's other negotiations pending from the previous administration with some of the largest economies in the hemisphere, talking about Brazil and Argentina. And so Mexico, in a nutshell, should continue to present itself as an economy that's open for investment, open for business. And in order to do that, we have to shift a lot of the focus of a nationalistic policy that looks to favor state-owned enterprises and that creates, makes decisions in the economy that are less than transparent. So if we are able to do that and we are able to implement the USMCA correctly and work with the rest of the world, I have no doubt that we will take advantage of the opportunities that we have in North America. I'll turn it over to my colleagues now.
So what to do basically to maximize the opportunities? So what does the homework look like for existing and potential investors nearshoring, relocating, or looking at new opportunities in Mexico? And I will start by saying one of the most critical things is to think local. And by that, I mean effectively that people tend to categorize Mexico, which is a very diverse and large country, as one thing and one bucket. And what you often see when you're looking precisely at some of the numbers that someone was mentioning and talking about the different specific locations, from a point of view of both the opportunity and the risks, there's a lot of differences in Mexico. So I think when you're specifically thinking of what you're going to be doing in Mexico and what you're looking for, you really need to drill down and go beyond the generalizations about, I don't know, Mexico is a good place for manufacturing. There are areas where it's actually very good to do manufacturing because of the availability of industrial terrain, the availability of labor, and the logistic hubs around, but there might be a challenge around security or vice versa. So I think the one thing in any sort of like investment homework is to really think local. Second element is actually in terms of monitoring and briefing back. I think one thing that we have seen for all of our clients around the last couple of years in Mexico is that the requirement to actually keep engaging their internal stakeholders in terms of how you monitor Mexico and how you keep track of what is happening on a day-to-day basis is something that has increased considerably. But on the positive side, it also helps to reduce the anxieties, right? I think perhaps the best way to put it is if you think about what goes on a regular week in Mexico, it feels a little bit like a telenovela, like a soap opera. There's a lot of noise happening. And so the requirement to actually keep distilling what actually is happening and what the reality on the ground for those investments are is critical. I mean, just to give you a simple example, you all would have seen last week's introduction of a potential measure to change or regulate outsourcing in Mexico. I mean, if you're a company with operations in Mexico, you would have seen that and you might have panicked. And obviously, there's still a lot of negotiations going on and there's still a lot of discussions around what that might end up looking like. But as I said, this requires a lot of monitoring and briefing back. Ken, do you want to tackle the political and stakeholder mapping?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Dan. Just very briefly, I think it's very important, as Dan said, to understand that there's many Mexicos. It's very different when you operate in Chihuahua, in Ciudad Juárez, as whether you're working on in Michoacán or Yucatan. And you really have to, when you operate in Mexico and you're looking to invest, to work with local people. It can help you understand how to move on the ground. In other words, understand the mapping of the political and stakeholders that you need to tap into. Who are the movers and shakers in the government, not just at the federal level, but at state and even municipal level. Understanding who the key private sector actors are in each one of your sectors, and this also applies to countrywide. Who are the big trade association heads, and who can help you, who has more influence in this government vis-a-vis what used to happen in previous governments. So it's very important to operate with that knowledge in hand, and to develop that in order to really map out your strategy for investment and developing all of these advantages that we've been discussing in this presentation.
Perfect. Also quite critical, and probably increasing in criticality, as precisely the involvement of the state or economic nationalism, to just looking at one of the questions. As economic nationalism grows, a lot of investors, both Mexicans investing in other parts, Mexicans investing in Mexico, and foreigners investing in Mexico, will be figuring out who you're actually doing business with, not only from a reputational compliance point of view, but also from a business track record point of view. I mean, there's, as I said, you're increasingly seeing the state back at the center, so you're more likely to be doing or interacting much more actively with regulators, with local partners in different locations. So I think it's going to be very, very critical to start looking in more depth and doing out a reputational business track record due diligence on who your potential business partners are, who you are getting, for lack of a better expression, getting into bed with when it comes to business. Security, one thing to talk about, security obviously grabs a lot of headlines when it comes to Mexico. First of all, when it comes to actual business investment and projects, security is actually one of the risks that is more easily manageable, and it almost never is an insurmountable object for investments in Mexico. It is something that can be, to some extent, anticipated, taken into account, be included as part of any sort of site selection or location selection, location assessment, and effectively something that you can add as a fixed cost to whatever your investment is. It'll be part of your assessment. It is manageable. Obviously, it presents some specific challenges, but if you take those into account when you're looking at an opportunity, you can manage them in front, and eventually probably effectively management to reduce their impact on any potential investment. And finally, I'll pass it on to Samuel, who's going to talk about the location assessment.
Thanks, Daniel. Yes, and certainly when we see that there are a lot of opportunities here, the first thing that we have to do is to determine on which sector I can get that opportunity. Okay, once we have once we have determined on which sector I want to explore that opportunity, then I have to define the size of the opportunity. Okay, and with the size of opportunity comes the risk of the opportunity. Certainly, after you have an idea, general idea, if that may make sense or not, then the most important thing is to run a rapid location assessment, okay? This rapid location assessment can give you the opportunity to see how the investment panorama is on each of the locations that you may be considering, or open your eyes to new locations that you haven't even considered, okay? If the decision, and from there you can decide to go or no go, okay? If the decision goes for a go, then it is important to run a full site selection process. And this full site selection process has to do with the risk evaluation. That's something that Daniel is an expert. It has to do with the trade implications of your products and processes, where Ken is the most expert guy in Mexico. And finally, all the items related with labor, incentives, real estate, logistics, that where's the area where we can be of help. So once you have the full analysis, you will have the whole picture about how your business may look if you decide to go for an investment in the region. Okay, so that will be it for me. I really would like to thank to Daniel, to Ken, for the opportunity of having this talk. We have time for answering some questions. So Carlos, if you help us with that. Thank you very much, Daniel, Ken.
Yeah, sure. So we're a little bit short of time, but I have here some questions that I will like you to address. So the first one is, it says, if economic nationalism continue in the US and it starts to rise in Mexico due to the midterm elections, are we going to see an open trade and investment confrontation between both administrations in the following years? So,
who would you like to answer that?
It's all yours.
There you go. You have it at your hand. Come on. I think that that Ken and
all
Dan
right,
can,
I'll take a stab at it, and you guys can correct if I say anything silly. But I think that you know, what we're going to witness with the U.S., as I had mentioned, is the possibility of the U.S. being more incisive on some key issues that are priorities for the Democratic administration. However, one advantage of a change of regime in the U.S. is that we are not going to be seeing the volatility and in certain degree the responsibility that we saw on many fronts with the Trump administration in terms of the personal leadership style of Trump, of tweeting, of backing out of deals, of you know, basically generating a hostile political environment between their main strategic partners. So a return to an institutional relationship under Biden can be positive. This does not mean that we may not have disputes under the USMCA. As I mentioned before, there are some dark clouds, I think, on agriculture. We shall see if the US goes forward and starts panels or cases on labor violations. This is very important because there's a lot of pressure from the AFL-CIO and other major groups in the United States to move forward on that. And they are sort of selling it to the government, saying, you know, you promised us that the USMCA would be different from the NAFTA, and under the NAFTA, we never had a case that prospered on labor. So those are the points that I see. Economic nationalism, you know, there'll be pressures in the United States, but also let's remember that Biden is a moderate Democrat. He's even more moderate than President Obama ever was. And one of his tasks will be to try to conciliate and to bring both sides of the political spectrum in the US together, Republicans and Democrats. And that means he will not be so easily swayed towards the trade policy that people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren pursue, that is certainly more protectionist. And in Mexico, well, the advantage of having the USMCA in place is that if Mexico's economic nationalism continues to rise and it sort of spills over into actual violations of the USMCA, very quickly there are mechanisms there that punish whoever violates the agreement, and these can be very costly sanctions, either directly by the US government on key strategic export products from Mexico, or through the investor state dispute settlement mechanism, which allows individual companies whose investments have been affected to sue the federal government and obtain damages. So that gives you a disincentive to not comply with the USMCA, which is actually a good thing.
I would only, yeah, I was just going to add one. I completely agree with Ken, and obviously you can expect conflicts and confrontations, but it's all about how those get resolved. And I think the interesting point now mentioning about the new administration is that I think even under Trump and with the backdrop of economic nationalism and the points that both Ken and Samuel mentioned in the presentation about the fact that even under Biden, there's some element of economic nationalism that is there to stay. I think the important thing to take into account was that there is a certain amount of guardrails, in the sense that even under someone like Trump, who was very much make America great again, and even under AMLO, who's effectively also started to introduce some sense of economic nationalism. There was consensus that both countries, and obviously adding Canada, so the three countries, that the agreement is good for the three countries and that you should stay in it. So I think that provides like a boundary where at some point, even if there's confrontation and people don't like it, you might end up with a situation where everyone respects that the agreement is good for the three countries and that you should do everything in your power to stay within it. So I think that's an additional comfort within NAFTA or USMCA.
Great. I have another question here. This says, what will be the impact of the USMCA of the Asia Pacific Nations trade deal, and what possibilities does the TPP or CPTPP under a new version have to revive with the US president-elect? I will also like to say here, probably it will be interesting also to know what your take will be on the role of China in Mexico, because we have also seen China as a competitor, and now the geopolitics are shifting and the economic nationalism being at the center. There should be some changes in the way that China it's being envisioned, or the opportunities of China in Mexico. Sam, I don't know if you want to go with it first, and
I will answer your question, Carlos, and then I will let Ken to answer the first question. But yeah, China has one problem. Chinese companies are very good in China, but they have no infrastructure, or they don't have the corporate structure to expand or grow outside of China. Okay, this is a huge problem, but this is also a huge opportunity. Where is the opportunity? Mexican companies may look for either joint ventures, or shelter operators may have a great opportunity there, as long as Chinese companies won't like to lose the market that they have gained. Okay, so I will say that China has to be seen as a very good investor for Mexico, and that's the way it has to be treated, considering that there is a great opportunity for common efforts between Mexican entrepreneurs plus Chinese entrepreneurs.
Thank you. So I'll jump in for the first part of the question. I mean, definitely, I think that the new deal in Asia, the RCEP, is a big deal. It's a signal that China is looking to strengthen its hand in its region, and after many years of negotiation, finally concluded a deal. We have to understand that it is a different type of agreement than the CPTPP or certainly the USMCA, because it's less ambitious in the disciplines that are essential to today's economy. And what I mean is that purposely China left out some of the more state-of-the-art disciplines, obviously in intellectual property, in many other areas such as sanitary, phytosanitary measures, any areas where you could reduce the level of control of regulators over the possibility of erecting trade barriers. China pushed actively not to have that. And that's one of the big advantages in terms of the quality of the agreement that we have in USMCA or CPTPP versus the agreement that was just signed. However, it does liberalize trade in a way that's very important. It tries to counteract, in a way, this notion of nearshoring that might suck out companies from China into the rest of the world, because what it's essentially doing is telling the world you now have a bigger field of play in Asia through China to the other countries that are members of this agreement. So I think that it is a big deal, and I think that it may actually generate an incentive for the United States to look to enter the CPTPP, our Trans-Pacific Partnership, if anything, for geopolitical positioning, and also because economically it can lead to great benefits to the US as well. That's why Canada and Mexico joined the CPTPP. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops over the future.
There is another question, I guess, Carlos. You are on mute.
The typical phrase of 2020. So what recommendations for the export manufacturing industry faced with pressure, according to USMCA, to form trade unions?
I know that this answer belongs to Ken. I just would like to say that the secret is to do your homework. I mean, having a pre-assessment or an assessment on how are you standing in front of all these new regulations is the key part. But again, Ken, this is all yours.
No, I agree completely with what Sam just said. I mean, it is very important to understand what the new requirements are in the labor chapter of the USMCA vis-a-vis the NAFTA, and especially understand that it has very real implications for the way business is conducted in plants that have a relationship with a union, and it can affect the ability to export into the US or Canada. So I think that the immediate recommendation is, of course, make sure that you are complying with all aspects of Mexican law. In other words, in terms of the ability to allow for the space for workers to engage in collective bargaining, to create unions. If it is in accordance to Mexican law, then you must follow it, because one of the basic principles in the USMCA is that each country commits to follow and implement its labor laws correctly. Once this is decided, and if a union is formed, then there are different provisions, especially in Annex 23 of the agreement, that establishes how the collective bargaining agreements must be transparent. They must be made of the knowledge of the workers, and there has to be a secret vote, an individual vote to put them into effect, which doesn't happen in many instances. The way the union leaders are elected, that's also has to be transparent, and it has specific provisions. So all of that must become of the knowledge of the companies. And as Sam was saying, preparing for that is essential. We had been working with quite a few companies on helping on this, what we call an internal audit and compliance on labor provisions. We have to understand the domestic law of Mexico, also the requirements of the USMCA, and this review or this audit allows you to take an X-ray of how you are doing and where could be certain pitfalls or areas that could be red flags where you do not want to get caught with your fingers on the door in case the US pushes a case, whether it's frivolous or not. You know, the fact of entering into that realm of a potential case can hurt the company's image, and it can chill trade. Because one of the elements that exist in the USMCA is a possibility of a retroactive imposition of penalties on a company. And what I mean by retroactive is that if today a company is signaled in Mexico, a bicycle manufacturer, for example, that could be in violation, the panel may not decide until 6 months from now. But once it decides, whatever was imported into the US during the period where the panel was analyzing could be subject to duties. And that's something, that was done in the AMLO administration, negotiated in the final stretch of the negotiations with the US Congress, and that we, or those who negotiated the agreement originally, see as a negative, because it gives a lot of power to the US to say, okay, we may not impose tariffs now, but beware, stop buying from that company, because 6 months from now, we may hit them with tariffs, and that chills trade. So what you need to do as a company is basically make sure that you're not even put on the radar for a potential case, and we can definitely help with that.
Yeah, I would just add one small thing that I think it's actually a positive from the requirement around trade unions, which is precisely if you look at what's happened with some trade relations in Mexico, suddenly being forced to have a trade union that is much more transparent and compliant with the USMCA rules actually allows you to potentially shield your operation from some of the hijacking of local trade unions and some of the undue influence of some, let's put it, negative union leadership in Mexico. So you get an ability, an opportunity to actually have much better positive trade relations under the protocols and the compliant structure of the USMCA that you might have had with trade unions under Mexican law.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and it's something we have to look at. The labor chapter is something that will bring a lot of positives to the trade relationship between the three countries, but we also have to be prepared how to help companies defend themselves in cases that occur or prevent those cases. So preventive medicine is always the best medicine.
Better, yeah.
That's right. All right, well, we're drawing to a close, so we would like to thank all our panelists for their collaboration and for their insights today, and all our participants also for taking part on this webinar. So thank you very much again for all your insights and for your participation, and we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken, Daniel, Carlos. Have a great day.
Thank
Goodbye,
you to all of you.
everyone.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.